Let's start with the hard truth. If your thesis just tells me what a source is about, well, your foundation is already crumbling. It's literally the most common trap writers fall into. You know the feeling, right? You're staring at a blank screen, panicking, and you think you're analyzing a text. But really, you're just giving a high school book report on the topic. You summarize the plot and kind of just hope for the best. But true rhetorical analysis, that requires digging a whole lot deeper. It means putting on your hard hat and inspecting the invisible architecture of persuasion.
Welcome to this explainer. Today, we're going to act as your personal writing coaches. We're here to help you transform your rhetorical analysis from a flimsy, basic summary into a structurally sound, load-bearing masterpiece. We'll look exactly at how to craft an advanced thesis that sets your whole essay up for success right from paragraph 1. Because honestly, once you get this blueprint right, the rest of the essay practically builds itself.
Okay, let's take a quick look at the agenda for today. First, the thesis foundation. Second, the blueprint formula. Third, beyond basic appeals. Fourth, 4 advanced models. And finally, common mistakes to avoid.
Let's dive right into section 1, the thesis foundation.
So, before we put up the walls, let's pour a really solid base. The absolute crucial point here is that your essay is not about arguing the issue itself. Let's say your sources are about climate change or, the dangers of social media. Your thesis absolutely shouldn't be about whether climate change is bad or if social media is harmful. Leave that debate to the scientists. Instead, you're evaluating the underlying mechanics of the persuasion itself. How is the author trying to convince you? What invisible tools are they using to shape your perspective? Basically, your thesis is an analytical claim about their strategies, not their topic. Because if you start arguing the topic, your entire essay is going to collapse.
Think of these 5 elements as your ultimate building inspection checklist. For a strong thesis, you must explicitly identify the sources you're looking at. Maybe it's a TED Talk and a couple of opinion articles. Next, you have to make a definitive analytical claim. Then, focus heavily on the rhetorical strategies being used, mention the core appeals, like ethos, pathos, or logos, and finally, you actually have to explain how that persuasion is achieved. If you miss even one of these crucial elements, your structure is going to lean, and your reader will instantly know you haven't fully grasped the text.
Let's look at how this plays out in practice. Take a weak, topic-only thesis like, the TED Talk and opinion articles discuss social media. Honestly, this is a classic summary mistake. It tells me absolutely nothing about the analysis, it just gives the broad subject matter. Now, check out a slightly better attempt. The TED Talk and opinion articles use rhetorical appeals to persuade audiences. Okay, better. It identifies that rhetoric is actually happening, but it's still way too general. It's kind of like saying a house is built using tools. I mean, true, but it's not very insightful. You haven't told me what tools or exactly how they're being used.
Now, this is where we make the leap to an advanced thesis. Read this stronger example with me. Although all 3 sources address the impact of social media, they rely on different rhetorical strategies to persuade audiences, with the TED Talk emphasizing emotional storytelling, one opinion piece prioritizing logical evidence, and the other balancing credibility and emotional appeals to shape public opinion. Boom. Look at that structure. We identify all the sources, make a comparative analytical claim, focus on specific strategies, and create a really clear, multi-part roadmap for the entire essay. The reader knows exactly what's coming next, and the writer has a perfect blueprint to follow.
Moving on to section 2, the blueprint formula.
Look, if you're struggling to get started, you don't need to sit there agonizing over a blinking cursor. This simple plug-and-play formula practically forces you into an analytical mindset. Although all 3 sources discuss blank, they differ in their use of blank, revealing the blank. It literally forces you to analyze relationships rather than just listing isolated facts. Now, the first blank is your connecting topic. The second blank is the rhetorical difference. But that third blank, that revealing that section, that is where your high-level analysis lives. That's exactly where you secure the A grade by proving you truly understand the why behind the author's choices.
Let's see this formula in action. By filling in those blanks with a modern issue, say, artificial intelligence in education, you immediately lock in a really sophisticated comparative argument. Although all 3 sources discuss AI in education, they differ significantly in their use of ethos, pathos, and logos, revealing how rhetorical choices are shaped by audience expectations and persuasive goals. Do you see how much that elevates the writing? You're no longer summarizing what the authors think about AI. You're actually decoding how different authors manipulate communication to hit completely different demographics. You've gone from being a passive reader to an active expert inspector.
Let's hit section 3, beyond basic rhetorical appeals.
All right, once the walls are up, it is time for the interior design. To do this, we need to map out the similarities and differences across your sources. The strongest theses almost always highlight unexpected relationships. So, ask yourself, do all three sources rely heavily on cold, hard logos? Do they share common goals but take entirely different paths to get there? Or, when looking at the differences, does the TED Talk rely way more on emotion and accessibility, while an opinion piece leans super hard into statistical expertise? Moving beyond basic appeals means showing exactly how strategies adapt to distinct viewpoints or audiences, and that is a real hallmark of advanced analysis.
Let's look at Section 4, 4 Advanced Thesis Models.
Okay, we're going to walk through 4 different model homes here, 4 totally distinct ways you can structure your thesis, depending on what jumped out at you. The first model zeroes right in on the classic appeals. Yeah, those Greek terms your teacher makes you memorize. This is fantastic when your sources contrast sharply in their foundational strategies. For example, your thesis might highlight how a TED Talk relies primarily on pathos, using really compelling personal stories to connect with a broad audience, while an opinion piece leans heavily on logos and hard data. And maybe the second piece builds its argument purely on the ethos of a renowned expert. Basically, you're categorizing the sources by their primary weapon of choice.
Now, the second model shifts the spotlight directly to the audience. In this one, your thesis argues that rhetorical choices change fundamentally based on who is actually listening. You might point out that while all the sources address the exact same issue, the TED speaker prioritizes accessibility and engaging visual language for the general public, whereas the opinion writers focus on highly ideological, evidence-based appeals meant for a specialized or political readership. The thesis basically becomes a fascinating study in audience adaptation and communication theory.
Model 3 takes a really bold stance on effectiveness. This is where you explicitly argue why one specific source creates a much stronger connection than the others. You aren't just saying they're different, you're critically judging which one worked best. So your thesis might state that although each source presents a compelling perspective, the TED Talk emerges as the most persuasive. Why? Because its unique combination of ethos, pathos, and logos creates a perfectly balanced connection with a skeptical public. You're basically planting a flag and defending it.
Finally, Model 4 focuses on the ultimate persuasive goals. This approach analyzes how credibility, emotion, and logic are combined not just to present facts, but to actively shift audience attitudes and deeply held beliefs. You're arguing that effective persuasion extends way beyond just throwing evidence at people. You're showing how authors strategically sequence their appeals to slowly break down audience resistance and ultimately build an entirely new ideological framework in the reader's mind. Pretty powerful stuff.
And that brings us to Section 5, Common Mistakes to Avoid. Before you hand over your final draft, we need to talk about the fatal flaws that cause these essays to completely collapse. Number 1, never let your essay devolve into a simple summary. Just writing, "The texts discuss social media," is a structural failure right out of the gate. And number 2, absolutely avoid turning your analysis into a personal diary entry about your own agreement with the author. Saying something like, "I agree more with the TED Talk because it is correct," completely misses the point of the assignment. Remember, your job isn't to agree or disagree. Your job is to objectively analyze the machinery of the argument, totally regardless of your personal feelings on the matter. And please, beware of the most common trap of all, simply listing rhetorical devices like you're reading off a grocery list. The sources use ethos, pathos, and logos. Great, you spotted the tools and you sprinkle them in like magical fairy dust hoping to pass the class. But you have to actually analyze how those devices appeal to distinct audiences and strengthen the overall effectiveness. Don't just point at the hammer. Explain why the builder chose that exact hammer for that specific nail to hold the entire house together. Context is literally everything.
So, to prevent those mistakes, run through this sequential pre-writing checklist before your fingers ever even touch the keyboard. Step 1, identify the connecting issue and what each source is trying to get the audience to believe. Step 2, note specifically how each author establishes their credibility and taps into emotion. Step 3, evaluate which appeal is actually the strongest in each individual source. And finally, Step 4, ask yourself why those strategies differ across the texts. Trust me, doing this legwork up front will practically write your thesis for you, saving you hours of frustration.
As you sit down to architect your next essay, I want you to ask yourself one final question. Are you just identifying what an author says, or are you truly uncovering how and why they persuade? Because the strongest writers, the ones who craft truly advanced analyses, they know that rhetoric isn't just about the words on the page, it is about the invisible architecture of persuasion. Master that blueprint, and I promise you'll never write a basic summary disguised as an analysis ever again. Thanks for joining me on this explainer. Now get out there and build something great.